This is All India Radio. In World News Hotspot, now we bring you a discussion on global community concerns over China's interference. The participants are Dilip Sinha, former ambassador, and Simran Sodhi, journalist.
Today we are discussing the India-China 14th round of commander-level talks, which are scheduled to be held tomorrow. We also see that the talks between India and China come at a time of tensions, when we have seen a very aggressive China, its actions across the border, and this has created tensions in the India-China relations also. Ambassador Sinha, how do you see these talks which are going to take place tomorrow, especially when you look at the background and we have seen the Chinese aggression across the border, which has been there for the last few years now. And we also saw that the talks which happened in October last time also broke down in a stalemate. So looking at the background, how do you see these talks which are scheduled for tomorrow?
Well, these talks are taking place after a brief hiatus. As you mentioned, the last round of talks that ended in October ended with an acrimonious exchange, and thereafter the military officers of India felt that nothing more could be achieved at the military level and the talks should be raised to the official or political level. A month later, the officials did talk to each other and they agreed to resume these military level talks. But then again, that was in November. Now it's taken almost 2 months for them to actually get round to holding the military level talks. So it was a good thing that India asserted its position. When India found that China was being obstinate and was not willing to disengage from the areas where India is keen that China disengages, then India decided to put its foot down and not hold the talks. So one has to see now what attitude China adopts at these talks. Remember that in the previous rounds, there has been some progress and India did withdraw in some areas to provide a certain degree of disengagement. And one of the key areas was the Kailash range, because of which there was some criticism within the country also that India perhaps had given a bit much. So India is extremely keen to ensure that, especially in the Depsang Plains and down in the Demchok area, China goes back and disengages, so that our troops are able to patrol the areas that they were traditionally doing all these decades.
Ambassador Sinha, we also see that the Chinese aggression, and we have seen a lot of analysis, a lot of debate which has centered around the rise of China in these last few years, as we have seen China, not only the economy grow, but also the military which has been modernized. And under Xi Jinping, one sees a China which seems very intent on an expansion of territory and expansion of influence. How do you see the world in general, global powers in particular, when we look at the US, European Union? How do you see the world engaging with a China which seems quite intent on making its presence felt on the global level? Also seems very intent on increasing its influence and its territory globally.
China has been an imperial power ever since the Communist Party took over. China reconquered the territories that were earlier ruled by the Qing dynasty, the Manchu dynasty that ruled China for almost 300 years. And China, under the Communist Party, claimed all those territories as belonging to it. And China, if you remember, way back in the 1950s, also tried to export the communist revolution and create disturbances in countries that it considered as its tributary countries. Now, in recent years, we find that aggression has come back to Chinese foreign policy. And that, to my mind, has a lot to do with, one, the personality of Xi Jinping that you mentioned, and in recent years, to two factors. One is China's uncertainty in its economic front. China does face a lot of economic problems. And the other is Xi Jinping's personal ambition of equating himself and trying to achieve what Chairman Mao had done earlier. So Xi Jinping is extremely keen to get a third term endorsed by the National Congress, which will take place in October this year. And he wants to show that he is the kind of strongman that Mao was. Now, this has led to an unprecedented coming together of China's neighbors. China's policy of aggression has been strongest towards two countries. One is Taiwan and the other is India. But it also has disputes with a lot of its Southeast Asian neighbors in South China Sea and with Japan. So China feels that now that it has been able to set things right with Russia, which was its old enemy, and it has secured that particular frontier of it, it can now start taking on the other neighbors with whom it has disputes, be it in the case of India, whatever territories Tibet used to claim before when Tibet was independent, and in the case of Taiwan, the existence of Taiwan itself. But this has led to an unprecedented coming together of China's neighbors. You've seen, for example, recently we have had the quadrilateral security dialogue formed by the four countries, the US, India, China, Japan, and Australia. Then Australia and the US formed a military alliance, the AUKUS along with the UK. And now you have Japan and Australia coming together in a military cooperation agreement. This is, again, a new development and a very big development at that, which shows that various countries are now understanding the threat that China presents, if not directly to them, to the neighborhood, and it needs to be stopped. So in this situation, we'll have to see how Xi Jinping reacts to this. So far, there is no indication that he is backing down or adopting a more conciliatory posture. Chinese officials continue to mouth the various irredentist claims of China and make all kinds of allegations against other countries and their behavior, especially against Taiwan and slightly less so, but also against India.
Ambassador Sinha, you mentioned about the Quad, and we have seen that this has been a very successful coming together of India, US, Australia and Japan. How do you see the Quad going forward, especially as we also see that there seems to be a renewed emphasis on the Indo-Pacific? And we've seen a lot of people saying that this is actually an anti-China grouping which has made China uncomfortable. Do you feel that the Quad has the potential, even if it is not that anti-China, it still has the potential to push China to a position or to a posture which is less aggressive? Do you feel that this sends a message to China, and is that showing of late?
Well, that is exactly the aim of Quad. Quad is meant to bring together the four major democracies in this region to cooperate with each other, both to strengthen their own position and also to give reassurance to the other smaller countries in the region, especially in Southeast Asia, that these countries are there and they need not fear any hegemonistic designs by China. Now, there are various other areas in which Quad is cooperating which are not directed against China, but the fact that China is there and is pursuing its aggressive policies automatically gives Quad a certain role that brings it in confrontation with China, and that is really for China to choose whether it wants to live in peace with its neighbors or it wants to confront them and threaten them, as it is doing in the case of Taiwan and the border regions of India. And in this kind of a situation, it is inevitable that Quad will take a strong stand against any aggression by China. Now, I mentioned that in the Quad, the other three countries have already entered into military agreements. The Quad is still a security dialogue arrangement, but if the situation becomes more difficult, then I'm sure the military option will have to be brought in, and the security cooperation in the Quad will have to be upgraded to a more level of greater military cooperation to ensure that not only the interests of the Quad, but also of the other countries around China are protected.
Ambassador Sinha, as we follow the talks which will take place tomorrow between India and China, one issue that has dominated the international headlines and has upset the strategic equations in the region has of course been the situation in Afghanistan. And we have seen post 15th August last year the Taliban take over Afghanistan, and we've seen Pakistan also feeling more confident in the region, and that confidence also comes in part because it gets its support and its strength from China. Do you feel that Afghanistan is one issue where we see a more engaged China now dealing with the Taliban, and is that a source of concern for India specifically given the China-Pakistan nexus?
The fact that the Taliban took over Afghanistan and replaced the old democratic regime with their own fundamentalist government, and the fact that they did so with the assistance of Pakistan, where they had been given shelter earlier, and the fact that China, which is a close ally of Pakistan, is supporting the Taliban is a matter of concern for us, because we have traditionally had problems with fundamentalist and jihadist regimes. But given this fact, one must also remember that China itself is a victim of Islamic fundamentalism, and China fears that in the Xinjiang region. And also the recent developments that have taken place in the last few days in Kazakhstan, where the president of Kazakhstan has blamed jihadist forces coming out of Pakistan and Afghanistan for the disturbances in Kazakhstan, and where China has assured support to Kazakhstan, shows that the situation is really a lot more complex and unpredictable in this region. So we'll have to see how far China wants to support the Taliban and how far it really wants to regulate and control them, so that the fundamentalism and the jihadism that they are inevitably going to spread in the region remains confined to Pakistan and Afghanistan. This is not going to be an easy task, and we have to observe the situation very, very carefully, because we ourselves are victims of this. To a certain extent, even Pakistan is now facing a problem because of its efforts to draw a fence between Afghanistan and Pakistan along the Durand line, which the Taliban does not recognize. So it's an extremely complex and fluid situation, and we'll have to observe this very carefully to ensure that our interests are protected, and we keep alerting all countries, including China, to the problem of playing with the fire of jihadist groups.
Ambassador Sinha, another thing that China has initiated has, of course, been the Belt and Road Initiative, and we've seen that this is one project that has expanded globally, whether it is Asia or whether it is Europe today. This has also meant investment. This has also meant what is now the debt diplomacy which China runs. How do you see this initiative taking the Chinese ambitions forward? And do you see, or can we expect smaller countries to be able to resist being a part of this? And how do they deal with debt diplomacy? And that is something which comes up again and again when we discuss China, and how one of the ways in which they do their diplomacy globally.
Well, the BRI was a pet scheme of Xi Jinping, and this was one of his grandiose ideas of making China a superpower in the economic field by giving assistance to countries and building projects in those countries, especially infrastructure projects in which China is extremely strong, and China had the money to build these projects. So the schemes were very ambitious, and China went into a large number of countries with very generous offers of loans to build these projects. But over the last 1 or 2 years, partly due to the COVID problem and also partly due to China's own economic problems, we have seen that the BRI scheme has actually slowed down. And another factor for its slowing down is that the countries where China has gone in with its BRI investments have piled up huge debts. So what you call a debt diplomacy has actually become a debt trap for all these countries, including for Pakistan, which is one of the bigger recipients of BRI investment. We have seen how in the case of Sri Lanka has had to sell off its gold to pay China about $6.5 billion for one of its projects which went awry. The problem with China's assistance is that China's trade with all these countries is entirely in China's favor. So whatever debt China pays to these small countries, these countries are not in a position to pay back the debt. Because unless they build surpluses, unless they export to China, how do they pay back the debt that they have built up? And many of the infrastructure projects that China builds are white elephant, as for example, the Hambantota seaport and the airport in Hambantota. So even in the case of Pakistan, the CPEC that they have built, the port of Gwadar, is not picking up. It is creating local resentment. And that comes from the fact that China's projects, the BRI projects, do not give employment to locals. China sends its own workers there. But I must say here that there's one beneficial side effect of the BRI, and that has been that Western countries have now woken up to the fact that they must compete with China, and for that they must up their investments and their assistance to smaller countries in Asia and Africa. And America and the European Union both are now willing to invest in infrastructure projects, which they were earlier not willing to do. So this competition between the two has led to a realization in the Western countries that they have to revive their foreign assistance programs and move into areas like infrastructure, which are essential for the development of countries in Asia and Africa. One hopes that this development will be beneficial and perhaps one of the better fallouts of the BRI, apart from the debt traps that the various smaller countries have got into.
Ambassador Sinha, as we round up the discussion, what is the realistic expectation India should have from the talks tomorrow? As the talks take place tomorrow, realistically, what is it that we should expect going forward? Because we've seen China and we've seen what happened in October last year. So how would you realistically say that these are the outcomes we can hope for the talks tomorrow?
I think we should go into the talks with firmness. We have a very strong position both on ground and in terms of our legal position. China was not ever present in the Aksai-Chin region for more than 100 years. In fact, they first came into this region only in 1892. So we have a very strong position there, and there is no reason why we should pull back. We have to remember that while disengagement is a good thing and we should have peace and tranquility on the line of control, it does not mean that we must give up our positions. And we are starting to build our border projects, our access to the border areas, which makes our position quite strong, and we should stand firm. Yes, we need peace and tranquility on the line of control, but not at the expense of our national interests and of our territory. So we should stand firm, stay firm, and let China tell us what it wants. If it wants to improve relations, then it must pull back from the regions where it has advanced in the last 2 years. Otherwise, if talks fail, I don't think we should be in any way feel either sad or feel that we are to blame for it. China is responsible for creating the situation, and they should take the steps to improve the situation.
And we will follow the India-China talks, which will be taking place tomorrow. And we will continue our discussions on China and the rise of China globally. With these comments, we bring today's discussion to an end. Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on global community concerns over China's interference. The participants were Dilip Sinha, former ambassador, and Simran Sodhi, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on a mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may email opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.